Picture this. You're 19 years old, 5 feet tall, 100 pounds soaking wet, and you're standing in front of a Navy recruiter who's looking at you like you walked into the wrong building. "Sweetheart," he says, not unkindly, "maybe you should try the Coast Guard or administrative work." What he doesn't say, but you can hear loud and clear, is, "You're too small for this, too fragile, too female." Now, fast forward 5 years. Same woman, but now she's chest deep in freeze. Picture this. You're 19 years old, 5 feet tall, 100 pounds soaking wet, and you're standing in front of a Navy recruiter who's looking at you like you walked into the wrong building. "Sweetheart," he says, not unkindly, "maybe you should try the Coast Guard or administrative work." What he doesn't say, but you can hear loud and clear, is, "You're too small for this, too fragile, too female." Now, fast forward 5 years. Same woman, but now she's chest deep in freezing seawater in a pitch-black engine room with flames licking at the ceiling above her head. The ship is listing 15 degrees. Men twice her size are unconscious. The smoke is so thick she can't see her own hands. And she's the only thing standing between 59 sailors and the bottom of the Persian Gulf. Her name is Petty Officer Christina Phelan, and this is the story of how the woman they said was too short to serve became the reason 59 families didn't get that knock on the door that every military family dreads. The girl who wouldn't quit. Let's rewind to 1982. Christina Phelan was born in a small town in Minnesota where winter lasted 8 months and everyone knew everyone's business. She was the youngest of 4 kids, and from day one, she was the smallest. Her brothers were tall, her sister was tall, her parents tall, but Christina, she topped out at 5 feet even. In school, she was always in the front row of class photos, always picked last for basketball, always told in 100 small ways that she was too little for the big world. But here's what nobody understood about Christina Phelan. Being small had taught her something that all the tall kids in her class never had to learn. She had to work harder, think smarter, prove herself every single day. When she was 8 years old, her dad took her fishing on Lake Superior. The boat they were on started taking on water, a crack in the hull nobody had noticed. While the adults panicked, little Christina grabbed a bucket and started bailing. For 45 minutes, while her dad worked to patch the leak, she moved water with a bucket that was almost as big as she was. Later, her dad asked her why she didn't cry or scream like the other kids. Her answer was simple. Would that have helped? That was Christina. No drama, no excuses, just what needs to be done. By the time she was 17 years old, she knew 3 things for certain. 1, she didn't want to spend her life in a small town. 2, she wanted to prove that size didn't determine worth. And 3, she wanted to serve something bigger than herself. So in March of 2000, 2 months after her 18th birthday, Christina Phelan walked into a Navy recruiting office. The recruiter, the same one from our opening, took one look at her and sighed. It wasn't meanness, it was just doubt. The Navy had only recently opened more combat positions to women, and even then, there were skeptics everywhere. "What rate are you interested in?" he asked, using the Navy term for job specialty. "Engineering," Christina said. "Machinist's mate." The recruiter blinked. Machinist's mates worked in the engine rooms, the hottest, loudest, most physically demanding spaces on a ship. It was heavy equipment, tight spaces, and brutal conditions. "That's ambitious," he said carefully. "Have you considered something in administration or medical?" Translation: have you considered something more appropriate for someone like you? But Christina didn't budge. She'd done her research. She knew what machinists' mates did, and she knew she could do it. "I can handle it," she said. To his credit, he didn't refuse her, but he also didn't hide his skepticism. "All right," he said, "but boot camp doesn't make exceptions. If you can't keep up physically, you'll wash out." Christina nodded. "I understand." What she didn't say was, "I've been hearing that my whole life." Boot camp at Great Lakes Naval Station was exactly as hard as everyone said it would be. The physical training was relentless, the academic requirements were intense, and every single day, Christina had to run faster, work harder, and push further than most of the recruits around her just to keep up. She struggled with some of the physical requirements. The obstacle courses favored long limbs. The heavy equipment drills required reach she simply didn't have. More than once, an instructor pulled her aside and suggested she consider a better fit. But Christina had learned something in that sinking boat on Lake Superior when she was 8 years old. Determination doesn't have a height requirement. She passed boot camp. Then she passed A school, the technical training for machinists' mate. And in the spring of 2001, Petty Officer 3rd Class Christina Phelan received her first ship assignment. The USS Cole DDG-67, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. She was 20 years old, 5 feet tall, and she was Navy. Life in the engine room. Let me tell you what it's like to be a machinist's mate on a Navy destroyer, because most people have no idea. The engine room is not some clean, spacious workshop you see in movies. It's a maze of steel, pipes, and machinery packed into a space barely big enough for the equipment, let alone the people maintaining it. The temperature regularly hits 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The noise is so loud you can't hear someone screaming 3 feet from you, and every surface is either scorching hot or covered in oil. For Christina, who had to climb ladders designed for men 6 inches taller, squeeze into maintenance spaces barely wide enough for her shoulders, and operate tools that weighed nearly as much as she did, every day was a test. But here's what she discovered. Being small wasn't always a disadvantage. When a fuel line needed repair in a crawl space too narrow for the bigger sailors, they'd call Christina. When delicate work needed to be done in tight quarters where broad shoulders couldn't fit, Christina was the one who could do it. When precision mattered more than brute strength, Christina delivered. She wasn't just keeping up anymore, she was becoming indispensable. Her fellow machinists' mates, most of them men who initially doubted her, started to see her differently. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for special treatment. She showed up, did her job, and went above and beyond without making a show of it. By 2006, Christina had been promoted to Petty Officer 2nd Class. She'd served on 2 ships and earned the respect of every crew she'd worked with. And when the USS Samuel B. Roberts, FFG-58, a guided missile frigate, needed experienced machinists' mates for a deployment to the Persian Gulf, Christina volunteered. The Persian Gulf in 2007 was a powder keg. Tensions with Iran were high, piracy was rampant, and the U.S. Navy's presence in the region was both necessary and dangerous. Christina knew the risks. Every sailor did. But she knew her duty. On January 15, 2007, the USS Samuel B. Roberts left port. Christina Phelan was in the engine room, ready for whatever came next. April 14, 2007, the day everything changed. It was a Saturday, beautiful weather, clear skies, the kind of day where you almost forget you're in one of the most dangerous waterways in the world. Christina was on duty in Main Engine Room 2, one of 2 massive spaces that housed the ship's propulsion systems. She was running a routine diagnostic on a fuel pump, just another day at work. At 2:17 p.m. local time, the ship's alarm system erupted. "Missile inbound," Missile inbound. All hands brace for impact. Christina had trained for this moment 1,000 times, but training and reality are two very different things. She barely had time to drop the wrench in her hand before the world exploded. The missile, later identified as an Iranian-made C-802 anti-ship cruise missile, struck the port side of the ship just above the waterline. It punched through the hull like it was made of paper, detonated inside a fuel storage compartment, and sent a fireball ripping through 3 decks. The explosion was so powerful it knocked sailors off their feet 3 compartments away. The ship listed hard to port. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in red. And then the water started coming in. In main engine room 2, the impact knocked Christina off the platform she was standing on. She hit the deck hard, her helmet cracking against steel. Her ears were ringing so loud she couldn't hear anything else. Smoke was already filling the space. She forced herself to her feet, her training taking over, even as her mind struggled to process what had just happened. The first thing she saw made her blood run cold. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hayes, her supervisor and a 20-year Navy veteran, was unconscious on the lower deck, half submerged in water that was pouring in from a rupture in the hull. 20 feet away, 2 more sailors were down, overcome by smoke. The fire suppression system had activated, but it wasn't designed for this. The flames from the fuel storage compartment next door were feeding through the rupture, licking at electrical panels and fuel lines. If those lines caught fire, the entire engine room would become a bomb. Christina had maybe 2 minutes before this space became unsurvivable, and she was the only one still conscious. The impossible decision. In moments like this, your brain does strange things. Some people freeze, some people panic, but Christina's mind went crystal clear. She'd trained for fires, she'd trained for flooding, she'd trained for casualties, but she'd never trained for all 3 at once, alone, in a space that was actively trying to kill her. First priority, get the unconscious sailors to safety. Chief Hayes weighed at least 200 pounds. Christina weighed 105. The math didn't work, but math had never stopped her before. She waded through the knee-deep water, freezing cold despite the fire around her, and grabbed Hayes under the arms. She pulled, barely moved him. The water was making him heavier, and her feet couldn't find purchase on the slick deck. "Come on," she thought, "come on." She repositioned, got better leverage, and pulled again. This time he moved, 6 inches, then a foot, then another. The smoke was getting thicker. She could barely see. Her lungs were burning, but she kept pulling. It took her 90 seconds to drag Chief Hayes 15 feet to the base of the ladder that led out of the engine room. 90 seconds that felt like 90 years. But she couldn't stop. 2 more sailors were still down in the smoke. Christina took a breath, a mistake as it filled her lungs with toxic fumes, and dove back in. The second sailor, Petty Officer Ramirez, was closer. She grabbed him and pulled him to the ladder in 45 seconds. Her arms were screaming, her back was on fire, but there was still one more. The third sailor, Seaman Davis, barely 19 years old, was at the far end of the engine room, near the rupture where the water was deepest. The smoke was so thick now that Christina had to navigate by memory, feeling her way along the bulkhead. She found him face down in the water. No, 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 no. She flipped him over. He wasn't breathing. Christina dragged him through the water, through the smoke, through the flames that were now consuming the starboard side of the engine room. Her strength was gone. Her body was running on pure adrenaline and willpower. She got all 3 men to the base of the ladder. Now she had to get them out. If this story moved you, if Christina's courage reminded you that limitations are often just opinions, I want you to do something. First, hit that subscribe button, because this channel exists to tell these stories. The stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. The men and women who serve with honor, who sacrifice in silence, and who prove every day that heroism isn't about size or strength, it's about heart. Second, share this video. Share it with someone who's been told they're too small, too young, too different to chase their dreams. Share it with a daughter, a sister, a friend who needs to hear that what other people think is impossible doesn't matter. What matters is what you believe about yourself. And third, leave a comment. Tell me, what's something you were told you couldn't do that you did anyway? Because we all have our own engine room moments, times when we had to choose between giving up and pushing through. The climb. Here's something most people don't know about Navy ships. The ladders aren't like stairs. They're near vertical, more like climbing a wall than walking up steps. And they're narrow, designed for one person at a time to climb up or down quickly. They are not designed for a 5-foot-tall woman to drag unconscious men up while the room below is filling with water and fire. But Christina didn't have a choice. She got Chief Hayes into a fireman's carry, a technique she'd practiced in training, but never with someone twice her size. She got one foot on the ladder, then another. Each rung was agony. Her legs were shaking, her arms were numb, but she climbed. Up, one rung, another. Halfway up the ladder, her foot slipped. For one terrible moment, she thought they were both going to fall, but she caught herself, reset, and kept climbing. At the top, other sailors, responding to the damage control alarm, grabbed Hayes and pulled him through the hatch. Christina didn't wait to catch her breath. She went back down. Ramirez was next, then Davis. By the time she got the third man up the ladder, Christina Phelan could barely stand. Her hands were blistered and bleeding. Her lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. Her uniform was soaked with seawater, sweat, and blood. But all three men were out. The damage control team sealed the hatch to main engine room 2. Below, the fire continued to burn. The room was lost. But the 59 crew members still aboard the USS Samuel B. Roberts were alive. Christina collapsed on the deck, coughing so hard she thought she might throw up. Someone put an oxygen mask on her face. Someone else wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Through the haze, she heard Chief Hayes' voice. He was awake, confused but awake. What happened?" he rasped. Another sailor leaned close. "Phelan saved your life, Chief. Pulled you out of the fire." Hayes looked around until he found Christina. Their eyes met. He nodded once. No words, but she understood. "You did good, sailor." The aftermath. The USS Samuel B. Roberts limped into port 3 days later. The missile strike had killed 2 sailors on impact, both in the initial blast zone, and injured 18 others. The ship itself would spend 2 years in dry dock for repairs, but it could have been so much worse. The official Navy investigation determined that if the fire in main engine room 2 had reached the fuel lines, the resulting explosion would have split the ship in half. Casualty estimates range from 40 to 60 dead. Christina Phelan's actions, dragging 3 unconscious sailors out of an inferno alone while the ship was under attack, had prevented a catastrophe. 6 months later, in a ceremony aboard the USS Enterprise, Christina was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, the highest non-combat decoration for heroism. The citation read, in part, "Petty Officer Phelan's extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty reflected great credit upon herself and were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." Her parents were there, her brothers and sister, and every member of her crew from the Samuel B. Roberts who could make the trip. When the medal was pinned to her uniform, the entire room stood and applauded. Not polite applause, the kind of thunderous, emotional ovation that comes from people who know they're witnessing something rare and real. Christina stood at attention, tears streaming down her face, and remembered that recruiting office 7 years earlier. Maybe you should try the Coast Guard. She'd proven them wrong, not with words, with action. The woman behind the medal. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Christina how it felt to be a hero. She gave him a look that could melt steel. "I'm not a hero," she said firmly. "I did my job. That's it." But when pressed about whether being small had made the rescue harder, her answer was different. Being small? Yeah, it made some things harder. I had to work twice as hard to drag those men out. But being small also meant I'd spent my whole life figuring out how to do things people said I couldn't do. So when that moment came, I already knew how to make impossible work. She paused, then added, "Height doesn't determine heart. Anyone who tells you otherwise has never been tested." That quote went viral. It was printed on recruiting posters, shared on social media, and most importantly, it reached thousands of young women and men who'd been told they weren't big enough, strong enough, or tough enough for the challenges they wanted to face. Christina Phelan became a symbol, not because she wanted to be, but because her story proved something that needed proving. Courage has no size requirement. Where is she now? Christina Phelan retired from the Navy in 2018 as a Senior Chief Petty Officer, the second highest enlisted rank. She'd served 20 years, earned 3 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals in addition to her Navy and Marine Corps Medal, and trained hundreds of young sailors. Today, she works as an instructor at a maritime academy, teaching the next generation of engineers and sailors. She's married, has 2 kids, and lives a quiet life far from the spotlight. But every year, on April 14th, she gets messages, hundreds of them, from sailors who served with her, from young women she inspired, from the families of Chief Hayes, Petty Officer Ramirez, and Seaman Davis. One message from Marcus Hayes' daughter read simply, "Because of you, I got to grow up with my dad. Thank you for bringing him home." That's the message Christina keeps in her desk drawer. That's the one that reminds her why she did what she did. Not for medals, not for recognition, but because when the moment came, someone had to act, and she was there. The lesson. So what's the lesson here? Because there is one, and it's bigger than one woman's heroism. The lesson is this. Every person who ever doubted Christina Phelan, the recruiter who suggested administration, the instructors who thought she'd wash out, even the sailors who initially questioned whether she could handle the engine room, they weren't bad people. They were just wrong. They made the mistake that humans make all the time. They confused appearance with capability. They saw her size and assumed limitation. They looked at the surface and thought they understood what was underneath. But the sea doesn't care how tall you are. Fire doesn't burn less hot for bigger people. And courage, real courage, the kind that saves lives, has nothing to do with physical stature. Christina Phelan wasn't a hero because she was strong. She was a hero because when every cell in her body was screaming at her to run, to save herself, to let someone else handle it, she stayed. She fought. She dragged 3 men out of hell, even though it should have been impossible. And here's what haunts me about this story. How many Christina Phelans have we lost because someone looked at them and said, "You're too small, too weak, too different"? How many potential heroes never got the chance to prove themselves because we confused what we could see with what was actually there? The Navy learned something on April 14, 2007. They learned that the strongest sailors aren't always the biggest, that heroism can come in unexpected packages, and that when you judge people by their heart instead of their height, you get warriors like Christina Phelan. The world needs more Christinas, people who refuse to accept limitations, who work twice as hard without complaining, who, when the moment comes and everyone else is frozen, step forward and say, "I've got this." Because at the end of the day, the ocean doesn't care about your resume. The fire doesn't ask for your credentials. And when lives are on the line, what matters isn't how you look. It's what you do. If this story moved you, if Christina's courage reminded you that limitations are often just opinions, I want you to do something. First, hit that subscribe button, because this channel exists to tell these stories. The stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. The men and women who serve with honor, who sacrifice in silence, and who prove every day that heroism isn't about size or strength, it's about heart. Second, share this video. Share it with someone who's been told they're too small, too young, too different to chase their dreams. Share it with a daughter, a sister, a friend who needs to hear that what other people think is impossible doesn't matter. What matters is what you believe about yourself. And third, leave a comment. Tell me, what's something you were told you couldn't do that you did anyway? Because we all have our own engine room moments, times when we had to choose between giving up and pushing through.